to our intersectional talk because it's a pop-up and a lunchtime talk. So, you know, it covers so many things. I'm really delighted to be able to introduce our speaker today. Emma de Vries is a researcher at Leiden University's Center for the Arts and Society in the Netherlands. And for the past 4.5 months, she's been here as a visiting Fulbright. You should, as proud Bruins, you should know that she's off to this, someplace in Cambridge, Massachusetts in a month or so, and she said she doesn't want to go to Harvard because she's having such a good time here, and I think, once again, we win. So, sure, her project is Post-Dating the Post, examining neo-epistolary practices in contemporary culture. She combines a background in philosophy and literary theory with a strong interest in media studies and art criticism. I've already talked to a couple of our undergrads who've had a chance to talk with her, and I know our grads have too. And it's a wonderful thing to have Fulbrights in the department. We've had many over the years. And you know, to have this kind of cross-cultural dialogue about the things that matter to us is really a great thing, and a reminder that the federal government can do some things well sometimes. During this year, she's doing research both here and at MetaLab at Harvard, and she is a Prins Bernhard Cultuurfonds Fellow as well from the Netherlands, so I guess their government does things well too. So please welcome Emma de Vries to our lunchtime talk.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you for being here and for having me. Some people like to get a program to the lecture they attend, and the program I had in mind for today is very simple. I want to give you a general impression of my research, and I want to explain you why it is here that I'm doing this research, or part of it, here in California, and also here in a media arts department. But we will start here. And I want you to imagine you see this mailbox in the street. Well, maybe this image is so familiar to you that you don't have any thought seeing this. Or maybe you think it just stands there, lazily, no stress, no sorrows. That is what I thought, until very recently. Then I learned that post boxes have targets to meet. In the United States, any mailbox that structurally collects less than 25 items a day can be marked for disposal. And as a consequence of diminishing post volumes, today this prospect threatens quite some blue boxes. Over the past 2 years, throughout the United States, 8,000 boxes have been removed. That is about 15 per day. Well, postal communication, one tends to conclude from this sort of images, is an extinguishing sword. My research, however, departs from a contrary observation, namely that the place of letters in contemporary culture is not only this empty spot left behind by removed post boxes, but also that the letter somehow seems to resist against its own marginalization, that it somehow reclaims a place in our midst, and sometimes it does that in very, tiny, modest ways, and in low resolution too, I see now. And sometimes, this is what happens in the Letters to Strangers project, and other times the letter reclaims this space in a more megalomanic manner, as happens in the work of this graffiti artist, Stephen Power, and his project, A Love Letter for You, in which he literally reinscribes letters into the public domain. Well, sometimes letters make their return in books, as occurs in the trilogies of Nick Bantuck, which entirely consist of postcards, letters, folded in real envelopes that are stuck on the book's pages. And other times, they might be written by the artists employed by Snail Mail My Email, which is an alternative communication system. So if you send someone an email via this service, somewhere halfway, your email will be converted into a handwritten or hand-drawn letter. Even, this is the letter, and even when it is spam. These letters might also circulate amongst the members of Post Crossing, which is basically a reinvention of the good old pen pal club, which has actually, as you can see here, quite impressive statistics. 500,000 members in 217 different countries. Well, I could actually fill the entire talk with showing you the profusion of texts, images, objects, gestures, and a disparity of forms that in my research I assemble under the notion of neo-epistolarity. And with this term, I aim to address that at the brink of their extinction as a means of communication, postal practices experience a remarkable revival. So this neo-epistolarity can be defined as artistic, literary, everyday practices that recur to the letter and other postal mail as a form, an object, a theme, a procedure, in a time in which the letter seems to have lost its function as a communication medium. But even if I would provide you with some etymological information, still this term is, of course, a hideous and unpronounceable term. And now for me, what is quite an unexpected aspect of coming here to do my research, apart from the things that I hope to find, was that I was shown in this proximity of Hollywood that we have here, is how you can actually pour a sensation story out of basically everything, even out of very dull and academic vocabulary. So I was at a party and I came to speak with this film industry senior. And he, in one single question, he managed to turn my tongue twister into this sensational catchphrase. And he turned my research question into, well, basically a whodunit. He asked me, so who are these people? These epistoleros? And, well, if this is where we are, why wouldn't we put it like that? If you want to profile the epistolero, our suspicion can go towards all sorts of movements that he or she, this new letter writer of today, might be affiliated with. And I would love to, well, follow all these leads with you. They will take us to very interesting places. But time forces me to answer this question of context in another manner. Because the title of my talk actually proposed another more colloquial manner to speak about neo-epistolarity. It suggested that now that all our collective fantasies seem to be tickled by letters again, we might say that the cultural imagination is going postal. Well, when I use this term in indication of a new love for letters, that might seem crudely oblivious of the tragic origins of that term, going postal. Or it seems like missing that, like the epistolero as a word, the word has quite a violent ring. For the expression came into being through a series of workplace homicides in the United States Postal Services that occasioned this synonym of going mental to emerge. And these tragedies took place against the background of, well, deteriorating working conditions of postal employees, like, well, reduced wages, cuts in health and retirement funds, personnel discharges. And all these streamlining measures were the consequences of the general decline of volumes in post, caused, of course, by the increasing use of digital communication. Well, since 1986, the Postal Services suffered more than 20 violent incidents in which over 40 people were shot by current former postal employees. And with that context, it might seem a bit crude that I use this word for all these new postal practices, but my use of going postal is not oblivious of the tragic background of the term. On the contrary, I use it very deliberately, because what I aim to show in this lecture is that the new epistolary imagination, as you might call it, appears to be invested in the very same debates to which these violent incidents gave rise, which are debates about the claim, about the societal consequences of media technological change. Well, to illustrate that, so how these postal imaginations and this context of violence are related, I want to read you one quote, which is a quote by John Lackey Brown, an author who wrote, "In this agitated and uncertain time of rapid and dramatic change, the decline, indeed the demise of the letter, constitutes one of the signs that we are entering, or have entered, a new electronic phase of world history. And in this new phase, we no longer have the time to write letters, or by extension, and take notice here, to establish and maintain the long-term human relationships of which they are an expression." And at one point, Brown even goes so far as to suggest that with losing the letter, and now I quote, "modern man might have even lost his capacity to feel anything very deeply." Well, Brown's text is exemplary of a double emotion that is very recurrent in present-day writing of and about letters, which is, on the one hand, this ardent love of letters, which you could call epistophilia, which is paired with a fear or aversion of newer technologies, technophobia. And Brown's quote actually reveals that at the flip side of this positive qualification of letters in terms of their connective powers, and this qualification implies that, well, the mere acquisition of stationery can bring world peace within reach, that at the flip side of this qualification stands a negative evaluation of their technological antagonist as a disintegrating force, both neurologically, socially. Well, this idea that technology comes with intersubjective alienation and the loss of cognitive capacities. And from this viewpoint, of course, these mediatic changes are quite alarming. It intimates that with losing the letter, we end up in a context in which, well, these workplace homicides and other violent incidents will become more frequent. Well, when you study this dominant discourse, what you find is that it is composed of a very specific idea of what a letter is, what the qualities of letters are. And a lot can be said about these ideas, whether they're humanistic or hermeneutic or romantic or modern, which I will not do due to limitations of time. But instead, I will focus on the media technological present, in which new media critique has come to characterize digital media as the exact opposite or negative mirror image of these values. And then what you see happening is as follows. This is how the letter is defined or characterized. And digital media become just their mirror image, with this as a conclusion. And now the question that really intrigues me in my research is, do postal practices necessarily involve this, well, oppositional gesture? Or if not, can this new epistolary imagination be understood in a different way? And therefore, I want to introduce you to a movement that actually completely twists and thwarts this picture. It is a movement that engages letters for reasons that are actually the full opposite of the reason that people like this John Brown, of who we saw this quote, why they cherish letters. And this movement is called mailed art. And now another thing that I learned here in Los Angeles is that if you speak about mail art, with a foreign accent moreover, you have to spell the word. And if you don't, people think you either talk about mail art or that you talk about nail art. And not, as I want to do, about mail art. And on the one hand, this confusion perfectly matches, of course, the stereotypes of this city. But on the other hand, it is actually quite surprising because Los Angeles abounds in mail art. For example, in the Getty Center, there are big mail art collections. And this is one of the reasons that I came to California, to see mail art. Now, what is mail art? Mail art is generally taken to have been initiated in the late 50s by the artist Ray Johnson. And what Johnson did is he started sending out newsletters to other artists with his art. And shortly after that, his mail ceased to contain only his own work, and he encouraged others to add, alter, and return the mailed art, or to forward it to a given address for exhibition. Well, accordingly, Ray Johnson unchained an artistic practice that soon expanded beyond the community that was called his New York Correspondence School, and spread amongst all the avant-garde movements of the 60s, like Fluxus, New Realism, and developed into a global artistic movement with large-scale activities ranging from North and South America, Europe, Asia. Of course, the artistic engagement with letters have a very long history, but mail art is actually the first movement to identify its artistic practice with the mail medium and to define itself in terms of that activity. And my question now is, why are these artists so interested in mail? What is it that letters bring them? Well, what mail artists did is they equipped their post boxes as alternative spaces to the institutionalized mailboxes or white boxes of galleries and museums. So they used the postal system as a means to bypass the established routes of artistic dissemination, to expand the places of exposition and expression, and at the same time to democratize the accessibility of art. And mail artists considered the latter as a speedy contrast to the tedious, stagnant mechanisms of the art world, since they took out the intermediary figure between art and its exhibition. So we now see that actually mail artists celebrate in letters the complete opposite of the slowness that many of today's letter writers say is so nice about letters. They are interested in the letter, their speed. Similarly, while what you could call maybe this standard view of this opposition, the standard view of these media, or nostalgic neo-epistolarity maybe. Well, similarly, this standard view consider letters a counterpoint to the prefixed formats of digital communication. So here we have an inventive letter writer who soul searches for words, and who is opposed to this person who just thoughtlessly likes. Mail art, however, likes prefabrication. They are very fond of found footage and objets trouvés and ready-mades and collage. And similarly, whereas this nostalgic neo-epistolarity praises the originality of letters, mail art calls up for festivals of plagiarism in an aspiration to create and facilitate open-ended, ever-changing works of art. Well, where this standard view praises the uniqueness of the letter, mail art actually indulges in the possibility of its technological reproduction, and therefore often overlaps with what is called Xerox art. Another standard image is the idea that letters are authentic and provide us a direct tunnel to the soul of the letter writer. Mail artists are not interested in that. They're interested in the performance. They have pseudonyms. They wear masks and disguises. Rather than the genius individual that is supposed to be the artist, male artists are more interested in the collective, the collaborative, creative community that they called their male art network after. They called it the eternal network. So what I want to do now, before I explain why letters are also a celebration of forgery for male artists, I want to introduce to you a contemporary piece that actually defines itself as male art. In 2013, the artist collective Mediengruppe Beatnik launches an artwork that they indicate as a live male art piece. And this delivery for Mr. Assange consisted of a paperwork parcel that by means of the postal services was sent to Julian Assange at the embassy of Ecuador. And since the previous summer and still today, Assange lives there. He got a political asylum from Ecuador, and well, he still lives there because if he leaves the building, the British authorities might extradite him to Sweden, where he is persecuted for an accusation of sexual abuse. This box contained a battery pack, a charger and a converter, and a phone. And while the phone's GPS enabled the artist to track the parcel's whereabouts, its camera documented through a very small peeping hole the entire itinerary through the postal system. And the resultant images that were shot every 10 seconds were transferred directly to the website of Beatnik and to their Twitter page, where so the project could be followed in real time. Well, additionally, the artist, as you can see here, posted a written status update every few minutes. And after 32 hours, the parcel indeed reaches Julian Assange, who instantly starts to communicate with the project's viewer, that were now immense numbers. And he starts to communicate in a very epistolary manner, holding up cards to the camera. So now we wonder, why is this work indicated as male art? And how does live male art differ from a regular male art piece? And I claim that these questions are not just relevant to the understanding of this piece, but that they actually allow for a more general exploration of these postal practices in contemporary art that I want to study. Well, first, one could say that they follow perfectly the add to and return or forward logic that Ray Johnson initiated. So Assange forwards the package to another political prisoner, or a political prisoner. But maybe another description that the artists give of the work provides another clue. They call this project a real-world ping or a system test. And what interests me here is that actually system test is a very appropriate manner to characterize historical male art. So how is this historical male art a system test? Well, a ping is of course a means to test the system. Basically, a ping is an alien element that you introduce in a set constellation, and the validation or the interception of this strange element provides you information about the circuit and its functioning. Well, in male art, we already saw how the institutions and the conceptions of the art world were the object of such a test. So the pings that it introduced in this system were unconventional objects, male, and unconventional participants, the amateurs that would participate too. And accordingly, male art explored the boundaries and how they could expand it. One other system that was object of male artistic experimentation was the postal system, of course. And the pings here are something that we might indicate with a word that was coined by Ivan Stang as high weirdness by male. These are the alien elements that they insert into the postal system. And there is actually a very weird, wonderful prehistory to this, which I have no time to show you now, but maybe We can save that for the bonus material. But the idea that mail art can be seen as a test of the postal system is also expressed in the name of a mail art exhibition that was held here in Los Angeles. It was called Testing the Postal System. And this piece was one of its contributions. Well, apart from such aberrant objects, as you could call them, mail arts test the system by challenging manners of addressing their mail, as we find here on Ben Vautier's The Mailman's Choice, a card that could be differently addressed on both sides. And the most common test form in mail art is what one could call unofficial postage. And there, artists sent out mail with self-made stamps. And these do not only raise the question, what is validated, what is intercepted, what is considered valid postage or addressing, but also what is the exchange value of art? Can I maybe pay my letter with my art? And what is also important to notice here, as this stamp by György Galantai shows, that these tests are, of course, also self-tests, because mail art is not external to the postal system. These mail arts test the postal system, but they use it too. Well, these high weirdnesses by mail were sometimes accepted, sometimes rejected, and there was no real regularity to be perceived in these rejections and interceptions. And accordingly, what mail art did is they pinpointed irregularity in a system that pretended to follow rules in a quite straightforward manner. So by inserting these disturbing elements in an apparently stable system, a test like this reveals indeterminacies, unpredictabilities that normally remain invisible. And it is for these reasons that Mediengruppe Bitnik, by their the title that they chose for their project, somehow suggests that mail art is a form of, well, analog hacking, and that the errors in the postal system that they reveal in this manner are like paper glitches, you could say. This test of the postal system also, and stamps like these, show why mail art can be seen as a celebration of forgery, which of course opposes to the standard view of letters as something that is integer. And defining letters in terms of integrity and kindness is not something I invent. This is actually a literal quote from a very recent book by Simon Garfield, who says letters possess this irreducible integrity and kindness. So if we now return to this standard view, the interesting thing that we see happen in mail art is that they actually produce this shift, and they see that mail art celebrates in letters all the property that we see commonly being attributed to its counterpart. And what it then shows is that these can also be considered properties of letters. And what we here see is that these system tests, the test of the postal system, of the art world, are primarily tests of the systems of beliefs that we build around these media systems. Well, a lot can be said, of course, about the way in which Mediengruppe Bitnik does that in this piece. The analogies that they suggest between the analog system test of mail art, the digital system test that they produce at the same time by also making this live stream. This is a suggestion, of course, that is very present in the way they render this text, because on the one end, the capital letters and the underscores make reference to program coding and, well, give it the meaning of computer language. And at the same time, they present it as a real-world ping, which suggests that they take hacking out of the computer into culture, as they say in one of their interviews. This piece is a live mail art piece because it does not only involve the postal system as mail art did, but it also involves another system, that of, well, computational communication. Other analogies, of course, that it shows is how the celebration of this collaborative, creative community that is anonymous, that is worldwide, has some relation to the ideals of what Assange does with this WikiLeaks. Well, there are many interesting things to say about that. I don't want to do that now because I want to return to my claim that these works are very much concerned with the cultural implications of media technological change and this idea of the systems of belief that we build around this media. And it is therefore that I want to return to this world. Well, in these debates about the cultural consequences of media technological change, there are a few very popular targets. There are, of course, the violent games that people like to talk about, skimming, scamming, phishing, and of course the favorite is the Darknet. All discussions that are raised in confirmation of this idea, taken as proofs to the stance that the internet has made possible a sort of evil on a scale that was hitherto unknown. This electronic evil, or cybercrime, that would by far outstretch the range and wrongdoing of offline crime. Well, as we just saw, mail here is often taken as this moral antidote to the immorality imposed upon us by digital media. Interestingly, is that artists like Mediengruppe Bitnik show that there's actually just as much a dark side to postal media as there is to digital media. And therefore I want to show you one other work they made and that they indicated also as a live mail art piece, which is the random Darknet shopper. The random Darknet shopper is, as they describe it themselves, an automated online shopping bot provided with a budget of $1,000 in Bitcoin per week. Once a week, the bot goes shopping in the deep web, where it randomly chooses and purchases one item and has it mailed directly to the exhibition space. Well, this direct mailing to the exhibition space is, of course, already the logic that mail artist follows. What they moreover do is they post, so this is the exhibition space, and moreover they post a photo and a description of the purchased good on their website every week. Accordingly, they make us aware that a system like the Darknet depends almost just as much on the postal system as it does on the internet. The importance of the post is interestingly enough, also emphasized by one of the purchases of the random Darknet shopper, because he, somewhere in 2014, he bought randomly a decoy first-class letter. Now, what is a decoy letter? That is a letter that enables you to see, as the product description puts it, whether your mail is flagged or somehow otherwise interrupted. It is the sort of system test that we saw mail art doing too, but these are just commercial. You can buy them, somebody sends them to you, and you can see from the traces and the time space what happens to your mail. Well, interestingly, I came across something else that emphasizes the central role of mail in these practices, which is the fact that one of the Silk Road-like sellers of the black market has adopted the name Going Postal Group, a company that sells, as you can see by scrolling down the page, all sorts of illegal goods. Well, by thus showing yet another meaning of going postal, I wanted to show that there's no inherent good in the act of letter writing or sending mail, as this current discourse tends to put it. What we also see here is that the reason that I called this talk Going Postal Goes Viral does not only indicate that this revival of letter practices is explosive, but also that it is very intertwined with the digital at the same time. Well, both historical mail art and the live mail art, or media art, if you want to call it like that, of Mediengruppe Bitnik shows that the characteristics and values that we distribute amongst letters and digital media are actually often interchangeable. Well, that is something that I've wanted to show you today, but that does not mean that I deny the fact that different media, of course, enforce different perceptive patterns, that they mediate experience in different ways. It's also not my aim to make a point of like historical relativism, to claim that times don't change, that evil is the same always and everywhere. And I do actually think that works that we could call, well, the more reflective neo-epistolarity are actually very critical in ways that are at the same time concerned with the question what the specificity of these media is and what the particularity of historical moments is. But what they do is they show that the manner in which we commonly define this specificity, the manner in which we tend to oppose digital and letters, is more revelatory of our fears and our hopes in the face of technological change than it is to, and to our attachments to certain conceptions and convictions, than that it is revelatory of actual properties of letters. And it shows that maybe part of this new epistolary imagination is indeed imaginary. Now, that we're on this side with crime already, by way of a summary, we could return to our whodunit question and add some new suspects to the map. But actually, a much simpler, way of putting it is possible. Because with some reduction and simplification, pushing and pulling, we can come to distinguish actually two types of this neo-epistolary phenomena. So sometimes we could say rather it is can be considered a resistance against media technological change. And at other times, it's rather research into the consequences of this change. And I have actually hoped to show that this recurrence to old media is not always a reactionary gesture. That is not always opposed to change or to newer technologies. And that rather than reiterating to this dominant discourse of new media critique, letter writing practices often, like twist and thwart its conceptions by means of these, paper glitches, offline hacking, real word pings of, and other sorts of what we could call this high weirdness by mail. And thank you.
Can you please speak into the mic because we've been recording this, and I'll open the floor. Bob?
Yeah. Recently in the news, there have been questions about codes, Apple and the government, and I wonder how coding fits into this, and that the danger of decoding. And it seems to me that the only code that can't be cracked is, or theoretically can't be cracked, is a book code, because you have to know the book. And if you know Moby Dick, then you can crack the code. If it's how much attention do you pay to coding and the dangers of coding in a post-epistolary world?
Yeah, I think this piece by Mediengruppe Bitnik is very much about these dangers because, as I said, I was not really getting into the details of this piece, but what is very interesting about it is, of course, the whole WikiLeaks affair is about what you call the dangers of decoding. It's about what can happen with information if it's online. Well, of course, WikiLeaks is not only about coded information. It's all sorts of scandals in all sorts of media forms. But it is also very much about digital interception and or private data being seen and leaked by other people. And for example, what I do think these artists also show with this piece is, on the one hand, mail can be intercepted too. This package that was forwarded to Bahrain, to this Mr. Rajab, did not arrive the first time. So that shows mail can be intercepted too. But at the same time, we do have a law for postal mail that does not apply, does not exist for digital communication. There is something as the post secret that is quite well covered and protected in legislation. For digital communication, that does not exist yet, legislation like that. So there are many artists that play actually with this idea that the postal services right now are actually becoming this guerrilla form. If you want to trade drugs, do it by postal mail. That's a safe. And that is, there are many artists playing with that. For example, this random Darknet shopper who operates via the mail too. The bot was in prison for 3 months, but then the judge came to the conclusion that he could of course not be imprisoned because, both the part that was the mail, the postal part of the piece, was protected by the confidentiality of postal law, and the other part was a bot, so he could not be imprisoned. So I do think, this artist group plays with these questions and many other pieces that I look at too. So that is a very relevant issue. Any other questions?
Thank you. Emma, first of all, thank you very much for this very original and thought-provoking presentation. I wanted to ask, you mentioned mail art, but of course mail art took off in the 1970s, 1980s, well before the spectacular rise of digital media in the 1990s. Could you say maybe that the qualities you attach to mail art as the opposite of the qualities associated with traditional letter already paved the way, so to speak, for the digital media that came later? And another point, you didn't comment specifically on the political aspect of mail art. For East European artists, of course, you mentioned Galantai. It was a very important aspect to create this parallel universe, so to speak, be in touch with the Western world, with other parts of the world, in a way that could not really be caught by the political authorities because it was not political, but still it was creating a non-socialist alternative reality. So would there be also a chapter about the political history of the letter in your research?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, that is totally right. Especially, it already was quite political when it emerged here in the United States, but along the lines of its spread, it became actually more political. For example, in Latin America, mail art is still very big. I was in Argentina. There were so many contemporary mail art exhibitions, and it's especially because of this value that it is like a guerrilla system, or becoming that, or being celebrated in this manner. It's like a parallel path, a bit outside of some surveillance systems. So I will certainly dedicate some words to that. I have tried to show something of this political importance already by relating it to Assange. As to what you said about this anticipation of the internet, there actually has been written a lot about people that want to insert mail art in the genesis of the internet. And there are many people that say that mail artists were the big conceivers of, the idea that you have a decentralized, collaborative community that is global. In some ways, this eternal network, as they called themselves, is a model after which the internet was forged, you could say. It's just the problem with, genealogies and genesises is that to pinpoint the inventor is also not a very interesting thing, but their mindset was there, certainly, and there are many people who actually said that. what I do think is easier to prove, and I do think that that is quite a convincing claim, is that mail art paved the road for what was later called telecommunications art and media art, as we practice here in this department. And that is what's so interesting about them, that many mail artists embraced immediately digital possibilities when they arrived.
Is there anyone else? I think we'll call it a day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.